יהי רצון מלפניך אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהינו שלא יארע דבר תקלה על ידי ולא אכשל בדבר הלכה וישמחו בי חבריי שלא אומר על טמא טהור ולא על טהור טמא ולא על מותר אסור ולא על אסור מותר ולא ייכשלו חבריי בדבר הלכה ואשמח בהם כי אדוני ייתן חוכמה מפיו דת תבונה גל עיניי והביטה נפלאות בתורתך. So Friday before Shabbat, as Chag was coming to an end, we had Sudat Mashiach, as I'm sure many others did. We went into Shabbat.
Actually, I saw that a lot of people were doing it last night.
A lot of people did it on like Shabbat afternoon, yeah. But we did. So we were the Gemara that says if it's Erev Shabbat and you're eating a meal, you just mafrish mapa, make kiddush and continue. So some of us, I benched so that I can make hamotzi on Shabbat also. But anyway, so we were yotzei l'kol hadayot. As we come to the end of Chag, there is and there should be a real sense of longing because Shabbat is the time that belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Chag is the time that belongs to us. So it's almost like on Shabbat. On Shabbat God invites us into God's house, into God's world, right? On Chag we invite God in because we're the ones who determine when the Chag comes, and it's Mikadesh Yisrael v'Hazamanim. Shabbat, it's like that's the universal, the whole world is stuck with it. So it was a very sweet and a very poignant time. And as I mentioned when we met on the bus, as I mentioned, it's impossible to talk about Mashiach when you're living in Jerusalem without talking about politics. And so we talked a little bit about politics and we talked a lot more about politics. Anyway. Bezrat Hashem, we are now continuing with our learning of Rambam Hilchot Yesodei Hatorah. We're up to the 7th parak, and I want to actually spend some time on this because I think it's a really fascinating and an important topic. When we start to learn a text, it's kind of like it's like climbing a mountain. When we're at the bottom of the mountain, we're looking for a place to toe hold and a hand hold, and then we're looking for the next toe hold and the next hand hold, and then we get halfway up the mountain and we start to see the outline of the shape of the mountain, which we weren't able to see before because we were taking it like one step at a time. And we finally get to the top of the mountain, we look down and we see the form of the mountain, we see the road that we've come, we see how the mountain fits into the landscape, we see what's around us, what's behind us, in front of us, above us, below us. And similarly, when we're learning a text, when we start learning a text, we want, one halacha, second halacha, or one concept, the second concept, how does this first concept tie to the second concept? Does it lead naturally to it, so on and so forth? But as we get into it further and further, we start to see more broader themes and broader structures. And certainly with Rambam, who very, very advisedly, very knowingly use his choice of every single word and the way that he structures his writing, it's very thought out. And so now as we get past the midpoint of the Sefer, I think it's safe to say that we can start to see something of the structure of this particular Sefer, so the Torah.
The forest and not the tree.
We're starting to see the forest, thank you. And so this is my own take on it, and I invite you to come up with your own take on this and on everything else that we learn. The first 4 prakim, the concepts of the very, very beginning of everything. And I think we can all see how the first 4 prakim take us through the creation of the cosmos. And so I would say that as Sefer Bereshit begins, first of all, the Torah begins with Sefer Bereshit, which, as Rashi points out, the famous very first Rashi, that if the Torah is a book of halacha, then all of Sefer Bereshit is miyutar, it's unnecessary. Like, why are we telling all these stories? That the Torah should begin with HaChodesh Hazeh, which, as we said, this is why we say the bracha HaMevarech Yisrael v'Hazmanim, because we set the Zmanim, and that's the first halakha that was given to us as a nation. And one of the reasons that, again, to go back to the very first Rashi, the Torah begins with the story of creation because it wants to make sure everybody knows that God created everything and everything belongs to God and God calls the shots.
Listimatem.
Sorry?
Listimatem.
Yes, well, like I said, it's impossible to talk about Mashiach without talking politics. Excuse me. And so similarly, we see that Rambam begins the Sefer of Yesodei Hatorah, which is really about telling us the fundamentals of living a halachic life. But he begins with 4 long prakim that are all about the structure of the cosmos. And I want to suggest that certainly one to me, very obvious way of reading this is that this first sefer of Mishneh Torah mirrors the structure of Chumash. And the first 4 prakim, I think, very obviously mirror the whole story of Maseh Bereshit. The 5th parak, the 5th and 6th parak, which we've learned already, the 5th parak, as we said at the time, I think evokes the story of Adam and Chava, because it talks about sanctification of the name of God and about the consequence being death for failure to sanctify that. The 6th parak, which talks about God forbid, the destruction of the name of God, even one letter, I think, to me, is evocative of the story of Cain and Hevel. To me, and I've said this before, but as far as I'm concerned, all of Tanakh basically is a working out or a set of consequences, if you will, and a working through a repetition of the story of Cain and Hevel. It's basically all about people.
Of the Tanakh or all of Bereshis?
All of Tanakh. All of Tanakh. All of the problems arise from people not being focused on their own situation, not focusing on doing what they need to do. How many of the problems that we see just in the story, like just within Chumash, right? How many of the problems that we see arise from people wanting to be something other than what they are, or wanting to do something other than what their given task is, right? So Korach says to Moshe, "Oh, you guys got real chutzpah," right? And Moshe says, "Wait a minute. God put you in charge of all the kelim of the Mishkan, and God made you part of this holy family of the tribe of Levi, and that's not enough for you?" Right? So, and we can learn a lot from that, because what we need to do in life is to figure out what it is that God wants from us, not what God, wants from somebody else that I want to be that person. Anyway, it's a big challenge. So I would suggest that the 6th parak was evocative of the story of Cain and Hevel. Now we're coming to the 7th parak, B'ezrat Hashem, which discusses Nevuah, and I think very clearly evokes the story of Abraham, the story and person of Abraham Avinu. The 8th parak, as we will see, B'ezrat Hashem, reflects or evokes the character and the person of Moshe Rabbeinu. The 9th parak, when we come to it, B'ezrat Hashem, we will see really is evocative of Matan Torah, the giving of Torah. And finally, the 10th parak, which I think really reflects Torah Sheba'al Peh, the notion of a siag l'Torah, making a fence to protect the Torah. So in the meantime, the 7th parak, which is all about prophecy, there's quite a lot to say, and I would like to take a little extra time with it. Yesodei Hadat, it is among the foundations of our faith, Leda, She'el Minabe et Bnei Adam. It's to understand, to come to understand the ways in which God instills prophecy in human beings. Ve'en ha'nevuah chala ella al chacham gadol b'chokmah, גיבור במידותיו, ולא יצחו מתגבר עליו מדבר בעולם.
הוא מדבר על האדם.
אלא הוא מתגבר בדעתו על יצחו תמיד. So it's welcome. That nevuah does not come down on just any old person. Okay, prophecy only comes to somebody who's very wise, of a strong character, and a person who's not overcome by their own yetzer, but rather who overcomes their yetzer.
What about Bilam?
What about Bilam?
Hi.
Bilam's not in this parak. Well, what about Bilam? So I would say, we haven't gotten to it yet. It is very clear, I think, that Rambam says nevuah is not limited to Jews, right? As with many other things that Rambam says, Olam Haba is also not limited to Jews, right? We have a foot in the door, so to speak, but it's not limited to Jews. So I would like to. First of all, I read through this, and as I told you, I got this particular edition because it matches the one we have here, and also because the footnotes are very useful. And I found reading the footnotes for this chapter that almost every one is something that we should pay attention to. But I also want to take a little bit of a sidebar. Shvotov, here we are. Okay, so prophecy is only comes to people who are wise, who are of great character, and who control their own yetzer hara. Right? Adam shehu memole b'chol hamidot ha'elu shalem b'gufo she'ikanes lepardes v'yimashech be'otan ha'inyanim ha'gdolim v'harchukim v'tiyeh lo de'a nechuna lavin u'lasig. So such a person who is full of all these qualities and is also physically sound and fit for prophecy, as he says. The Gemara in Kiddushin says that a person upon whom the Shekhinah will rest, upon whom Ruach HaKodesh will rest, should not have physical blemishes. And says that this may also be reference to somebody being of prominent physical stature, which is one of the characteristics that's mentioned in Chabad. So when such a person enters the Pardes, meaning the realm of spiritual knowledge, that is a dangerous place to go, right? And is drawn to these great concepts. If this person has the right hashkafa, the right outlook to understand and to grasp these concepts, and that person will become, he says, Vihu Mitkadesh. He will become holy. Shvatov, meaning he will be sequestered, as it were, set aside for the gift of prophecy. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to read this first paragraph, and then we're going to take a little side tour into the Moreh Nevuchim, into Rambam's Guide for the Perplexed, where he goes on a great length about his understanding of prophecy, and I think it's fascinating, and I think it's a worthwhile excursion. And anyway, you guys are my prisoners for the next hours.
I thought this was a time of liberation.
That ended last week.
Now in the soup again?
No, you know what? So we need to say it. I know that we all understand it here at this table, but let's just say it. Everybody says, "Oh, it's man cherotenu," right? Everybody's very fond of, people pick and choose what they want to observe and what they think is important in Judaism, right? So people are, comes Pesach, everybody's saying, "Shalach et ami, let my people go, let my people go." That's only half the pasuk. What's the other half?
Avduni.
Avduni b'midbar, right? Get them out of this civilized place, send them out into the desert, and have them be my servants in the desert. They will serve me in the desert. When we're in the midbar, there's nothing else to distract us. The Torah couldn't have been given in Egypt. There's too much going on, right? So, but my bracha for us all is that we should now, because as Chazal teach us, right, it's not, the real inyan of Pesach is not Yitziat Mitzrayim, it's coming in to the Holy Land. And Baruch Hashem, we're here.
I think it's counting the Omer, preparing to come into the Holy Land.
We're here. Okay, but we're here. So we have to rethink. This is a whole separate conversation, maybe a whole separate course. Not for now, not for this shiur. We have to totally rethink our relationship to Judaism. because we've been living for almost 2,000 years with a religion that's helped us through the Galut. And now we're here. And we have to come to terms with being here and have to understand what that means. We have to live differently. We've lived for 1,952 years since the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. We have lived with and relied on a religion that's kept us alive in Galut, in exile.
Yeah.
And now we're here. We have to rethink our whole relationship to the Torah. We have to rethink our relationship to what does it mean to serve God now, in terms of not surviving as a people dispersed, but building and maintaining a functioning society. It's a very different set of challenges.
As you said, we don't speak of politics.
Let's continue. Right. Right.
It's a
Okay.
sense of sovereignty.
Right. And so when a person has the right outlook and will become holy, meaning that person will be kind of set aside, put into a position where they can receive nevuah. Welcome, Shavua Tov. And that person will continue, advance, separate themselves from those who walk in the darkness of his time. ומלמד נפשו שלא תהיה לו מחשבה כלל באחד מדברים בטלים ולא מהבלי הזמן ותחבולותיו. And the person will separate themselves from all of these worthless thoughts, from wasting their time, and will diligently train themselves. And rather, the person's mind should be directed towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu. למעלה. כשורה תחת הכיסא להבין באותן הצורות הקדושות, הטהורות, ומסתכל בחוכמתו של הקדוש ברוך הוא כולה. And a person would focus their entire attention upwards to the, as to say, like sitting right below the kisei hakavod, right? Meaning that we want to put ourselves in the position of the malachim. We want to be in a position to serve God and to connect to God. Remember what he said in the first 4 prakim, right? That all of the beings in all of the 9 spheres, right, which include the planets and the asteroids and the stars and the various levels of angels, right, and all the spiritual beings. Every being in the 9 spheres has self-awareness, and every being knows its creator. And every being also knows where it belongs on the continuum, right? So there's no being in the 9 spheres that wants to be anything other than what it is, which goes back to what we were saying earlier, right? The problem, Cain and Hevel, is the generation of, it's everything that's happened in human history ever since then, right? People wanting something that they don't have, people wanting to be something other than what they are, instead of trying to understand what it is that God put me here uniquely. So what is it that's so special about me that I need to do to contribute to this world? Instead, no, I want to be like him, I want to be like him, I want to have this, I don't want to have that, right?
Everyone has their own job to do.
But we're coming down here now to the person, in order to achieve the level of nevuah, what he's saying here is that a person needs to kind of put themselves in a position of a malach. He says you have to connect to the kisei hakavod, right? What does that mean? It means that we have to have the awareness that we have to enter into a level of dat. We have to enter a level of awareness, of knowing who I am, what my purpose in life is, of having constantly awareness of the Creator, and also trying to find where exactly I belong on that great chain of being. Because remember, he said in the second half of the first 4 prakim, right, that everything tachat gilgul ha-yareach, below the sphere of the moon, which is the lowest sphere that encircles the earth, right? That underneath that sphere, there's no dot. Everything is made from the 4 inert substances, right? Earth, air, fire, and water. And I want to thank you 2 gentlemen. So I said a couple of times over Pesach, I gave over the vort that the 2 of you came up with, that on Friday night that we bring the 4 elements to the table right at the beginning of Shabbat. It's a very, very beautiful chidush that you gentlemen came up with. So kol hakavod. It's like part of my standard spiel on Erev Shabbat It's really, it's Kabbalah, how we take the inert substances of this world and we convert them into dat, into knowledge, and and that's, so what Rambam is saying here is like, we are by our nature inert. We're made of the fourth. We don't have. That's why he said at the very beginning that the fundamental important task is to spend our lives trying to understand, trying to come to know that there is a creator. Not knowing God, just to know that there is some first thing, and that in itself is such a huge challenge that most human beings, most of the time, we don't get there, right? So now this is a person who has gone beyond that and is now trying to put themselves in a position of constant dot, like the celestial beings have constant dot, except we're on a higher level than the celestial beings because we also have the neshama, and we have free choice. So having the neshama and free choice are great, except that they're also constant distractions, right? So
consciousness.
Sorry?
Consciousness,
yes. And so, well, they have they have their own kind of consciousness, but it's not complex.
Yeah, but we're the only ones with free will.
Right.
There's
Exactly.
no comparison.
Right. No, exactly. And so he says now, when the Spirit, in other words, the Spirit of prophecy, Ruach HaKodesh, rests upon this person, his soul becomes intermingled with the angels on the level called the Ishim, which is the lowest level of angels. Those are the ones that communicate to the Nevi'im, to the prophets, right? And this person will be transformed into a different person and will understand with a knowledge different from what it was previously. He will rise above the level of other wise men. As the prophet Shmuel told Shaul, V'hitnabita imam v'nehtachta li'ish acher. And you will prophesy with them and you will turn into a different person. Okay. In the Guide for the Perplexed, Rambam talks at great length about prophecy. And I want to just read a little bit from chapter 32, where he starts from chapter 32 through to the end of the second book, which is...
How is it considered Moreh Nevuchim? Is it part or a part
Of what?
of our knowledge?
Who's us? Talking about, you're talking about like religious Jews?
Yes.
Well, first of all, you should ask whether Rambam Bechlal is considered part or not part of... No, because listen, Rambam is not widely taught in the yeshivas, for example, because Rambam says, no, you have to question everything and think for yourselves. And the yeshivas, for the most part, they want people to learn according to their seder, So, okay, so I'm going to try to read this quickly, and we'll see. The opinions of people concerning prophecy are like their opinions concerning the eternity of the world or its creation in time.
Excuse me to interrupt, but excuse me.
Go ahead.
Also, it is not speaking to us. It's speaking to the people who don't believe.
What, this?
Yes.
Not at all.
No?
Not at all. Not at all.
It's speaking to people who have doubts.
Not at all. Adarabba. This was written for, basically it was written like as a long letter to one particular student who was being told that he has to believe this and he has to believe that. And he has to believe this and he has to believe that. And he said, what do you mean? I have to believe that. I don't understand why does this person say I have to do this and I have to think that one? And so Rambam is saying, you know what, if you follow me, I will help you to understand the way I understand it, a lot of the things that you're being told that seem contradictory. This is not written for people. So first of all, first of all, you say this is not written for us, this is written for people who have doubts. You don't have doubts?
Yes.
Okay. And our purpose here, at least for starters, basically is to Bezrat Hashem to try to come to some understanding of Rambam's approach and of Rambam's mind, which is a gigantic mind. And we could do a lot worse than to just spend our life trying to understand Rambam, right? And so I think it's worthwhile to look at Rambam's broader and more fleshed out view of prophecy. I think it's very useful to us in this context. And if you guys get sick and tired of it, we can go back to the text and we can move through faster. But I think that this is, I think, by the way, this particular Sefer, Yesodei Hatorah, is so rich. I mean, you could do you could do dozens of doctoral theses just on this one Sefer. There's so much in it. Because, it's like Sefer Bereshit, right? It's like, Sefer Bereshit is not what the Torah is about. The Torah is about giving us laws. But we have to know what we're building on. We have to know where we're coming from, right? And there's so much that you miss reading the rest of Chumash and the rest of Tanakh, and then living the rest of our lives as observant Jews. If we don't read Sefer Bereshit, there's so much that we miss. We miss the connections. We miss the foundations, right? So that's our purpose here. And you know what? I'm not saying that Rambam is right about everything. I'm not saying that we have to agree about everything. I'm not saying that we will necessarily understand everything. But for me, this is a great, Rambam is a great inspiration to ask a lot of good questions. And if we're asking good questions, then we're getting somewhere, right? That's the way I look at it. If I'm not challenging my own assumptions, then I'm not going to learn something, right?
I think this is a particularly propitious time.
Go for it.
To connect prophecy with the idea of I keep on coming back to the state of Malchut, which is a state of being, because only the Jews could present this to the world in a certain way. There was a Torah-based Judaism, and for those Jews that want to redefine it, and for those non-Jews that want to destroy it, we are literally in a state of war. We have internal war, and we have external war on different levels. So I think it's particularly propitious.
Alrighty, here we are. And that being said, so we'll come back to this, not today, but going forward, right? The opinions of people concerning prophecy are like their opinions concerning the eternity of the world or the world's creation in time. I mean, just as people to whose mind the existence of God is firmly established, they have, as we have set forth, 3 opinions concerning the eternity of the world or its creation in time. Not for now. So also there are 3 opinions concerning prophecy. I will not pay attention to the opinion of Epicurus. Okay, this is not necessary. Okay, the first opinion, that of the multitude of those among the pagans, who considered prophecy as true and also believed by some of the common people professing our law, meaning uneducated Jews, is that God chooses whom God wishes from among men, turns him into a prophet, and sends him with a mission. According to them, it makes no difference whether this individual is a man of knowledge, ignorant, old, or young, but they also posit as a condition this man having a certain goodness or morality. Up to now, people have gone so far as to say that God sometimes turns a wicked man into a prophet. I'm sorry, I've not gone so far as to say that God sometimes turns a wicked man into a prophet unless God has first turned him into a good man. The second opinion is that of the philosophers. It affirms that prophecy is a certain perfection in the nature of humans. This perfection is not achieved in any individual except after training that makes that which exists in the potential pass into the actual. This translation is a little clumsy, but okay. Provided an obstacle due to temperament or some external cause does not hinder this, as is the case with regard to every perfection whose existence is possible in a certain species. So this is, if you will, a kind of Aristotelian language, right? That everybody has different potentials, and depending on our makeup, physical, intellectual capacities, and so on and so forth, there are potential, everybody has the potential to run, right? Now, some people, unfortunately, are born without legs. So that potential exists within them as a hypothetical because they're human beings, but they can never they can never actually actualize it, right? So he's saying that there are people, that everybody has kind of like this a conduit that can open up to prophecy, and some people are somehow structurally, constitutionally incapable of accessing and opening that conduit, or because of circumstances in their lives, they are not led to it.
They have a replacement quality. If they don't have one, they may have another.
Okay. For the existence of that perfection in an extreme and ultimate form in every individual of that species is not possible, right? It must, however, exist necessarily in at least one particular individual. If, in order to be achieved, this perfection requires something that actualizes it, then that something necessarily exists. Okay, so he's going through this kind of, let's call it Platonic, Socratic reasoning that he has to go through because of the audience that he's speaking to, and also because of the environment that he's pushing back against. According to this opinion, it's not possible that an ignoramus should turn into a prophet, nor can a man not be a prophet on a certain evening and be a prophet on the following morning, as though he had found something. Things are rather as follows. When, in the case of a superior individual who's perfect with respect to his rational and moral qualities, his imaginative faculty is in its most perfect state, and when he's been prepared in the way that he will, in such a way, he will necessarily become a prophet, inasmuch as this is a perfection that belongs to us by nature. So again, he's taking like the philosopher's view, as he calls it, right? That there is a human capacity for prophecy, and we attribute and we say that there are people who have certain excellences, which is a kind of a quasi-Aristotelian term, right? That they have achieved an elevated, a higher than normal level of intellectual development and of moral stature, and what he calls the imaginative faculty, meaning that they're open to seeing beyond just the simple, if you will, they can read between the lines, that they can get the deeper meaning. According to this opinion, it's not possible. According to this opinion, it is not possible that an individual should be fit for prophecy and prepared for it and not become a prophet. This is very important, except to the extent to which it's possible that an individual having a healthy temperament should be nourished with excellent food without sound, blood, and similar things being generated from that food. So in other words, if you are morally superior and intellectually superior and you have a great imaginative faculty, then you can't not become a prophet.
This has to do with religious imagination.
Well, again, he calls this the opinion of the philosophers, which means that we'll get to, I'm not sure how you're using the term religious imagination. Let's go through what Rambam is describing, and we'll try to understand it, the way that I think we can come to an understanding of it, right? The third opinion is the opinion of our law, the Torah, and the foundation of our doctrine. It is identical with the philosophical opinion, except in one thing. We believe that it may happen that one who is fit for prophecy and is prepared for it should not become a prophet, namely on account of God's will. So, as we will see, Bezrat Hashem, when we come later in later Sfarim, when we come to Hilchot Talmud Torah, we will see the kind of, there's the midrash about Avraham Avinu, that at a certain point he started looking at the world and he said, who's in charge of the world here? It can't be that there's this whole big thing existing without somebody being in charge. Who's in charge? Well, maybe the sun's in charge because I see when the sun goes up the world works. Oh, then maybe the sun's not in charge because I see when the moon comes out the sun goes down. Oh, maybe the moon's not in charge because I see the sun comes up, I see the grass, I see the stars, right? So that's the way the Midrash is describing it. This is kind of Abraham going through, if you will, the scientific method to try to understand the world, right? And again, I'm kind of oversimplifying it, but when Abraham totally exhausted the human intellectual capacity for understanding the world, that's when God stepped in with revelation. And that's, I would say, it's in a simple form, that's what Rambam is talking about here. So that's, if you will, the philosophical position. What Rambam is saying is that even somebody who has spent their whole life in preparation and who may actually be objectively prepared to be a Navi doesn't necessarily get Nevuah, doesn't necessarily get prophecy. Right? That God decides to whom God will give or not give prophecy.
And today there is no prophecy, right? I mean, that's
what we say, right? Yep, that's it. And to my mind, this is like all the miracles. And it takes the same course as the miracles. It is a natural thing that everyone who, according to his natural disposition, is fit for prophecy and has been trained in his education and study should become a prophet. That's a normal thing, right? But it's kind of like, go back to the analogy of athletics, right? You have 10 people who all set the world record for running the 100 meters, the mile, whatever it is, right? Only one of them will get the gold medal at the games, right? On any given day, everybody who has achieved this world-class level of excellence, they will exceed or come short, or for whatever complex of reasons on that given day, right? Only one guy can get the gold medal, okay? So it doesn't mean that the other 9 people are in any way inferior or deficient. But again, this is a kind of a simplistic example, but I think, the Rambam is saying that we don't know why God chooses to give prophecy to certain people and not to other people, right? But also, he's saying if you want to take the philosophical view, then the whole world is very simple, and then what happens when it doesn't work? Well, there is an unpredictable side to reality, which, by the way, so this was yesterday's parsha, right? Achrei Mot starts with what? With the Hamishtalech, with the scapegoat, right? The 2 goats, right? And it's very much about the randomness of existence, right? I mean, what makes one goat get chosen for this and one chosen for that? It's by lot, right? So
I'm surprised that for non-religious people exists Nebuah. According to them, where does it come from? Christian, Muslims, whatever. If they are not religious people, atheists,
right?
Do they believe in Nebuah? He speaks of 3 kind of the philosophers.
Right. So he says, so the pagans, these are people who have a religion, it's just not our religion, right? And they believe that there's some divine force that picks somebody and makes that person a nothing, right?
Philosophers don't have a religion.
I mean, if you look at ancient Greece, for example, right? There was even
they were religious, pagan religious.
They had a concept even after what's his name, Anaxagoras, who said that the sun is not a deity, it's a hot rock, and caught a lot of grief over it, right? But he didn't say that there was no such thing as a divinity, as a divine force in the world. Epicurus gets a really bum rap because people don't understand. People think of Epicurus as like this horrible person who told people to get drunk and use heroin and have sex all the time. And that's not at all what it was. He was really kind of like Buddha, yes, in the Greek setting. Actually, a very interesting thinker. But anyway, none of these people said there is no God. But like Epicurus, for example, said, there is this divinity, we don't know anything about it, except that we know that if it's a perfect being, and this is his take on it, it's a perfect being cannot do evil. And our suffering all comes from fear, and so we should not fear, right? So that's a non-theistic way of looking at life, right? Not worshiping God or serving God, but not denying the existence of God.
Yeah, but it depends what you mean by God. I think only the Jew defines God as transcending infinity. I don't think any other religion does that.
I don't know, and I don't know that it matters for our discussion here.
It does. Because the one that believes in a finite God, the idol worshiper, is going to have a certain view of the world that if enough people do that, then we're trapped by that idol worshipper view of the world.
But I
as opposed to a beyond infinite concept. I think that among, I'm not an expert on this, but I think that certainly among the major Greek philosophers, the notion of there was a struggle, as I understand it, over like the transition from the Homeric world to the Socratic world, where exactly that like contention took place, where
where they tried to move away from the notion of the Olympian gods who were like this nasty family of like like a bunch of people that you wouldn't want to, it's like a like a poorly written sitcom, right? With all these people squabbling about everything all the time and us being like tugged back and forth by it. And there was actually the religious development that tried to pull the whole way of approaching divinity to a more transcendent God. And I think Anaxagoras saying that the sun is not a deity, it's a hot rock, I would say it's more the idea of a transcendent God than the idea of no God. Right? But
could be Jewish influence on the Greeks.
You know what? That's a subject for a different PhD.
I think the Greeks were incapable of going beyond because they were materialistic people. Such a variation of the form.
I don't know. The third opinion. Okay, so you may or may not. We may be perfect in all respects. We may be perfect in terms of controlling our Yetzer Hara. We may be perfect intellectually. We may be perfect morally, and still not get the gift of prophecy. He who is prevented from prophecy is like one who was prevented, like Jeroboam, from moving his hand, or like the king of Aram from going out to seek Elisha, so on and so forth. So, prophecy only rests upon a wise, strong, and rich man, which is from the Gemara in Chabad. We have explained the fact, as a first fact, the one who prepares is sometimes prevented from becoming a prophet. You may know this from the history of Baruch ben Neriah. So from Sefer Yirmiyahu, the book of Jeremiah, his sidekick Baruch ben Neriah, who is on a very, very high level, who was trained and taught and prepared by Yirmiyahu for prophecy, and he set himself the goal of becoming a prophet, but was prevented, as he says, I am weary with my groaning and I find no rest. And he was told through Jeremiah, say to him, thus saith the Lord, thou seekest great things for thyself, seek them not. It's possible to say that this is a clear statement that prophecy is, God considers prophecy too great a thing for Baruch. And when he says that it's possible to say this prophecy is too great a thing, again, this is Rambam saying, we don't understand how and why God makes these decisions, but perhaps, the Pasuk says, you're looking for great things, don't look for great things. And so maybe prophecy was too great a thing. So Rambam has given us a kind of a very simple taxonomy, if you will, of concepts of prophecy, right? Is the concept of like, doesn't matter who and we don't know why. God says, picks one person and says, okay, you're a prophet, and zaps that person and that person prophesies, right? And that seems a little bit to be what happened with Bilam, right? We don't know why it is that Bilam was given prophecy. It's hard to say that Bilam merited prophecy from our perspective, certainly, because not even because he took out the contract on us, right? When Balak comes to him and says, "I need you to curse the Jews," right? But because he had direct contact with God, and yet he didn't get it, right? So it's very kind of problematic from the perspective of what Rambam is talking about, that prophecy comes upon people who have perfected themselves, right? The second view, which is that prophecy is like this human excellence that people can attain, right? And the Greeks were very big on prophecy, right? They read the entrails of birds, and they read the flights of birds, and they killed animals, and they sacrificed their daughters, and so on and so forth, right? So they had seers and sages and prophets and what have you.
But they were limited.
But the question is, if you posit that there is a absolute ability, just like there's an absolute ability to set the world record in the high jump or in the pole vault, there's an absolute ability to attain prophecy, then everybody who goes through the steps and goes through the training should attain prophecy. And it's hard to explain why they don't attain it. And Rambam is saying, well, of course there's a reason why they don't attain it, because God chooses not to give them prophecy. And I don't know why, But we have the example of Baruch ben Neriah, and God explicitly says through Yirmiyahu, who was his mentor, oh, you know what? Don't bite off more than you can chew, right? So Rambam's view and his description of the prophetic process here, I find fascinating. I hope you'll find it as fascinating as I do. Second paragraph, HaNevi'im, Ma'alot Ma'alot. There are many levels of prophets. כמו שיש בחוכמה חכם גדול מחברו, כך הנבואה נביא גדול מנביא. So just as among Chachamim, among wise people, there are people who are, shall we say, more wise.
Moshe Rabbeinu was our greatest prophet.
Was our greatest prophet, and we're gonna see later on, Be'ezrat Hashem, the unique character of Moshe Rabbeinu's prophecy. He stands apart from all the other prophets according to Rambam, both in the form and in the manner of his prophecy, and in the manner of his relationship with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. Gewalt. Hello, welcome.
The other prophets were communicated through dreams, right? But Moshe Rabbeinu has it more than face to face.
You're right ahead. Yeah. So, just as we can talk, or as he said earlier, talking about the levels of angels, that there are angels who are on higher level and lower level. It doesn't mean that the angels on lower level are not pure, absolute spiritual beings. But each, again, I go back to what I said about Cain and Hevel, right? Each person or each being has its place in God's creation, and the biggest struggle for us is to, as it's human nature, we want something that we don't have, right? So the first big struggle is for us to accept the fact that God gave us a specific place and a specific task, and then the struggle is to try to understand what that place and what that task is, and that's quite a lot for one lifetime for any human being, and most of us, I think, halabai, we should not fall short.
But you can come back if you can get it.
Some say. And so he says, just as there are, different levels of chachamim, it doesn't make the person who's on a lower level not a chacham. So similar, there are different levels of nevi'im. B'chulan en ro'in mar'eh ha-nevu'ah ela b'chalom, as you were saying. And the only way that they see the images, the visions of their prophecy, is in a dream. B'chazion laila, in the visions of the night. Or bayom achar she'tipol aleihem tardema, or during the day after they've fallen into a deep sleep state or into a trance state. K'mo shene'amar b'mar'a elav etvada b'chalom adaber bo, as it says in the pasuk. I will make myself known to him in a vision and speak to him in a dream. And when they fall into this state of prophecy, then their limbs tremble and their physical powers become weak. They lose control of their senses and their minds become emptied out. And they are free then to comprehend what they see. Moshe Ne'emar be'Abraham, as it says with regard to Abraham, ve'hine ema chashecha gedola noferet alav. As it says in the Brit Ben HaBekarim, the covenant between the pieces, a great dark dread fell over him. And now, one more. הדברים שמודיעים לנביא במראה הנבואה, דרך משל מודיעים לו. Except for Moshe Rabbeinu, everything that the prophets see in their vision, it's given in kind of a poetic or metaphoric set of images. מיד יחקק בליבו פתחון המשל במראה הנבואה וידע מה. And immediately it says the interpretation of imagery is imprinted on the prophet's mind, and the prophet knows its meaning. Okay? כמו הסולם שראה יעקב אבינו. as, for example, the ladder that Yaakov Avinu saw in his dream. וَمَلْאَכִים עולים ויורדים בו, and the angels going up and down, climbing up and down. והוא היה משל, and the dream was a vision, was a mashal, was emblematic of what? למלכויות ושעבודה, of the various kingdoms and of their oppression of the Jewish people, right? We know that there's a famous midrash that when Yaakov saw the angels going up and down, I think Rashi brings his midrash as saying that different empires would rise and they would oppress us and then they would fall. So the angels climbed up to the top, and then they have to climb down because what goes up must come down. And as the animals, the beasts that the prophet Yechezkel saw, or the boiling pot and the rod of the stick from the almond tree that Yirmiyahu saw, or the scroll of Yechezkel. All of these are metaphorical images. And similarly with all the other prophets. Mehem omrim hamashal upitrono kemo elu v'yesh mehen omrim hapitron bilvad. And there are some who would see the allegory, and they would give over the allegory, and then they would give over the explanation, and others would only relate the explanation of the allegory. Right, so in other words, what he's saying is that this process of seeing kind of an allegorical or poetic image, that's true of every prophet. Sometimes the prophet will give over and say, here's the image, the vision that I saw, and here's what it means. And sometimes the prophet will just say, here's the story. But Rambam is saying every prophet except Moshe Rabbeinu, when they give us just a sentence, a statement without an image, they received it as an image. They received it in a dream, in trance state, in a sleep state, in a vision of some kind. Sometimes they have to go through the process of giving us over that image, that vision, and then of giving us the interpretation. But even when we just read the straight message, we should understand that it came to the prophet through a vision. At times they will relate only the imagery without explaining. But all prophecies come in the form of metaphoric image and of allegories.
What were the schools for prophecy? To improve these skills?
I would say that schools of prophecy. We saw, for example, Yirmiyahu, who just kind of has this vision one day. God says to him, no, from before you were born, I had my eye on you. And he then takes on an apprentice, if you will. Baruch ben Yirmiyah. So I'm not familiar with there being schools explicitly for the purpose of attaining prophecy. Is that something that I missed?
It's like
Yes, there were schools.
Huh?
There were hundreds
Yeah, I heard there were
attending the school.
I think it was Eliyahu or Elisha had schools, and what I read.
Okay. So it's I think it's like any yeshiva. Most of the people who go through the process are not going to become Gedolei Hador, are not going to become among the great Torah scholars of their generation. But also you have to take in a lot of candidates to come through to the people at the top. Go back to the sports metaphor, right?
Trainer.
You're training a dozen people to do the long jump, right? And you're hoping, or you're training 100 people to do the long jump, or you're training 1,000 people to do the long over your career, right? If you're a trainer over your career, you train how many hundreds or thousands of people, and if you have one or two who actually make it to the Olympic podium, Gewalt.
But it's the guy that reinvents the wheel, like the Fosbury flop.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that works in Nevuah, but
Well, Freud, you take Freud.
okay.
He translated the images, the symbols they represented. So maybe the school was kind of the same thing.
So I think, and I'm not really expert on this. What's his name? I'll have to look it up. There were prophetic techniques. I think this is what you're referring to, right? That were taught that had to do with like certain types of kind of guided meditation to orient the mind to receiving Ruach HaKodesh, to receiving the spirit of prophecy. There were techniques of how to hold the body in a certain position in order to induce, I don't know what it's to open up the spiritual channels, maybe open the chakras or whatever. Aryeh Kaplan wrote a couple of books about, which, if you're interested, by the way, he wrote a book, I think it's called Jewish Meditation. He wrote another one about, specifically about prophecy, where he talks about like people would have to sit like hunched over with their head between their knees and with their eyes closed, and they would like listen to music. And in Shmuel you have Shaul going up on the mountain, and all the Nevi'im are up there, and they're all naked and they're playing music, and then he also begins to prophesy. So part of it is you have to be in the right setting, and even if you're in the right setting, if we're all sitting there studying prophecy together and we're all doing the same practice and we're all playing the flutes or the drums or whatever it is, there's a whole thing that's, perhaps also part of why Miriam brought the tambourine with her, right? Because there's an aspect of certain types of rhythmic music that induce a prophetic trance, right? So it's possible. She's called Miriam HaNavi'ah, right? And so what is it with hitting the tambourine? Like, why did the women bring the drums with them, right? Like maybe the women brought the drums in order to, keep prophecy alive among Bnei Israel.
So why do they call it tambourine man?
Because he had visions.
The tambourine can bring joy. What I understand, this joy is what.
Right, but as we're going to see B'ezrat Hashem next week, right? You cannot prophesy in a state of sadness. Yeah, exactly. So music is to lighten, to lift the spirit, to elevate the spirit. And also, if you're a musician, if you played music, especially, you get into a Shabbat Tov. Well, we're finishing up.
Yeah, we're going to you up 2 minutes.
Okay. You know that you get into a kind of a trance-like state playing music. You get a good jam going, you get a good groove going. I've played with groups where we're just improvising. We'll play just riff on one chord for 10-15 minutes straight, and by the time you finish, you're mamish totally in another state, right? If you've ever performed music, you get, like they say, getting in the zone, right? So it's like playing the music. There's a friend of mine, Rabbi Greg Wall, who is also a world-class jazz saxophonist, and he had a group called the Later Prophets. And it's they would get together and they would get again. I can't tell you what level they reached, but there's the connection between music and dance and rhythmic movement and a prophetic state is very, very clear.
There's a Muslim sect.
One of the explanations I heard when Aaron lost his 2 sons is that they drink this alcohol to reach higher levels. So this is another way also.
There's a very fascinating book that I recommend to everybody that I just read, which it's called The Immortality Key. The Immortality Key, and it's research into the psychedelic origins of religion. I will say no more about it this time. Amen. Wait 1 second. The rabbi comes in. We'll sing Kaddish, and then thank you very much.
Did you ever enjoy Bob Marley?